The Dice Tower is made possible by listeners like you. Thank you for your support. And by Cool Stuff Inc. Cool Stuff, in stock at coolstuffinc.com. The Dice Tower, episode 556.
Games that teach science!
Science! Welcome to The Dice Tower, a podcast about board games and card games, and especially the people who play them. On today's show, Geoff explores the limits of artificial intelligence, Suzanne and I explore the Spiel des Jahres nominations, and we all explore A Tale of Betrayal. Then we finish up the show with our top 10 games for teaching science. I'm Eric Summerer, and joining me now, the Dorothy to my cowardly lion, Suzanne Sheldon.
Science, science, science.
So now that I think about it, that probably wasn't the most appropriate intro because I should probably be Dorothy in this particular situation.
Well, you know, I'm not one to judge, but,
So
I have to admit,
I think this episode has probably the most roundabout way of getting done that we've ever had for a Dice Tower episode. So ordinarily, you'd be hearing me and Tom at this point. But Tom is away at Geekway to the West, so he was unable to do the show. And so I get on our networking, our podcast team thread and say, hey, Suzanne, Mandy, would either one of you like to join me for this particular episode? And Mandy says, yeah, sure. I guess it's my turn. I haven't done an episode with Eric. This will be great.
I know, and people really are excited about you recording with Mandy.
Yes, I am too. But then Tuesday happened, and I don't know if this made national news because I haven't seen the news in a while, but Hamden, Connecticut got hit by a tornado on Tuesday, right past my house. I have never experienced a tornado before. It is just breathtaking in the devastation that this thing has wrought, and it has knocked power out to the entire area, and I am still without power. I am recording literally in my booth in the dark on batteries, talking to you, Suzanne, on a cell phone.
Yep.
And so in all of this machination and trying to get power, not sure when I was going to go, our recording window just shrunk and shrunk and shrunk, and Mandy eventually had to say, I can't really do it anymore. And Suze wonderfully raised her hand and said, well, I'll do it again. He's not that bad to record with. And so, Suzanne, you and I get to do another show together, and that has me super excited and jazzed. And I'm really just happy to be talking to anyone at this point. I missed Dice Tower Tonight this past week, and
Yeah.
Mandy jumped in there, as well as Crystal and Amby.
Yep.
And it's just been... It's been a wacky cascade of stuff. I'm hoping to have power starting tomorrow so I can work. That would be nice. Anyway,
yeah.
How are you? How's your week been?
Oh, my week comparatively has been just peachy keen, and I am so sorry about all the stuff that you're having to deal with right now, but I gotta admit, I'm pretty excited to be recording with you, so I guess for me... yay, tornadoes a little bit.
Hooray for
Is that
tornadoes.
insensitive? I'm sorry.
Sure.
That's awful. I apologize. I'm the worst.
So there's a couple of things we're supposed to cover at the top of the show, like, if you didn't get a chance to back us in our recent Kickstarter, I think you can do that by emailing Tom and get involved in the backer kit, which has been going out to all the backers for our recent Kickstarter. Also, pay attention to Dice Tower Tonight. We already mentioned that. That's in our off weeks. It's a video show with Tom, me, and Crystal Pisano. We have a lot of fun when we're able to all get together and do it, but it's a great time. We chat live with the audience. It's a blast. And also, there's still room to join us for the Dice Tower Con, which is coming up 4th of July week in Orlando, Florida. Suzanne, you're going to be there. Mandy's going to be there. Tom will be there. It's going to be So much fun. I can't wait.
I'm pretty excited. Now, Eric, am I going to see you at Origins first, or is Dice Tower Con the next time I'm going to see you?
I am so excited to be going to Origins. I've been feeling a little left out over the past several months with various events and stuff, and so I'm excited to finally jump back into the fray and actually go to something and be involved once again. So I'll be at Origins, and I think then it's almost an event every month until the cruise.
Whew.
If I'm not mistaken. So yeah.
We're definitely headed into the season.
We definitely are.
And somehow the season seems to get longer.
Yeah, they do. It does get longer, doesn't it? We are here, of course, not just to talk about my woes in weather-related issues, but also to talk about board games. And Suzanne, what have you been playing lately?
I have been playing so much. Obviously, Mandy and I talked a little bit about CMON Expo last episode. I got to play a ton of stuff there, but just in time for when I got back from CMON Expo, I had packages on my doorstep, Eric.
Ooh.
Packages from Japan.
Oh.
Yeah. And it was Game Market. Game Market's now, it used to only be annual, but now it's twice a year. And they just had Game Market. And I have some friends over in Japan that help me get games from Game Market over to myself. And oh, it's such a delightful little package. I'm just starting to dig into the games. But of course, the first one I had to tackle was one of the roll and write games out of Game Market called MetroX. And this is designed by Hisashi Hayashi, who's such, really one of the better known designers out of that market in, the US and in Europe with trains and things like that. And MetroX is Eric, I hope you get to play this. It's diabolical. This one is a winner. It hurts. It's so good. So instead, it's a roll and write game, but as I've discussed in our roll and write episode, even if it's card driven, I still call it a roll and write.
Right.
And this is what this is. So everybody gets a score sheet, and it's got a bunch of, it looks like a metro map. It looks like a subway map with little boxes with stations. And you have a deck of cards, and the cards have numbers on them. And ultimately, those numbers are going to determine how you fill in the boxes as you go. It's a great game because any number of people can play. So if you have 100 score sheets and 100 people, you could play this game with 100 people.
Nice.
A card is flipped over, you make a choice on where you write something, and you move on. And ultimately, what you're trying to do is just fill in complete rail lines. I think there's maybe, 10 different rail lines that intersect and weave around all across this map. And as you pick a number, you write a number in, and then you fill in bubbles to the right that or stations that match that number. There are some twists, like if you run into an already filled in spot because these things intersect with each other, then you have to stop so you could, be less efficient. And there are cards that let you skip over stops and things like that. Eric, what is so great about this one is you have to plan. You have to familiarize yourself with this route map, essentially, because what rail lines intersect, it's absolutely critical that you know which ones overlap with each other, where they intersect, because you only get so many opportunities to mark in any given rail line. And if you miscalculate, you're never going to finish it. And you're going to cut yourself off from some points. It hurts. The planning hurts. And because you have that nice little random element of this deck, not quite sure what's going to come up when, this one is a keeper. MetroX comes with 2 different score sheets that have 2 different maps, and it plays solo. I've played it 3 times solo already, plus a bunch with my play group who's also really enjoyed it. This is a great roll and write game from Hisashi Hayashi, and that's a MetroX.
Huh. So you say that sort of learning the map is very, very important. Does that slow things down in your first play with a particular map where you have to really look at all those connections and really puzzle it all out? Does that slow things down?
Yeah, I would say it can. I think it depends on what kind of player you are. For us, we just kind of dove in and went with it. And, about 3 minutes into the game, we're like, oops, well, that was a mistake. And, 5 minutes later, I shouldn't have done that. And we just kind of rolled with it. And by the time the second game around, we all felt like we had a much better understanding, and then we're making much smarter decisions.
Okay.
Conversely, could it slow you down if you were really assessing it up front instead of just kind of going with it? Sure. But not, I mean, it's still a roll and write game. It's very quick to play overall. So even if it slows you down, it's not adding that much time.
Well, that's MetroX. The reason I ask about things slowing down is my first game to talk about is called Renegade. And this is not from Renegade Games. This is from Victory Point Games. It is a cooperative deck building game, but it's more than that. It's actually sort of a tactical map-based game as well. It's got a cyberpunk theme. You're a bunch of hackers and you're trying to infiltrate an evil corporate server sort of thing, and the server's deploying guardians to attack you, and you're trying to contaminate the system in order to defeat it. Every player is going to have a starting deck, but you also have a map where with all these sort of grid sections, servers for different colors, and also they're sectors, and they're numbered 1 through 6. And it's all scenario-based. So the intro scenario is something like you get through 3 levels of the bad guy, and it has mini tasks that if you succeed at the mini task, relatively good things happen, and if you fail at the mini task, you're going to have nasty things happen to you. But you have to continue either way to get through the whole thing. You've got a starting deck with lots of symbols on them, and these symbols come in, I think, 4 different suits. There's also a wild suit. And each of these symbols, these colors, trigger different things. So blue is good for movement around the board, and green is good for pushing tokens around the board. Yellow is good for translating the bad tokens into good tokens. Red is good for attacking the other tokens, simply eliminating from the board. And not only do you have the symbols on your cards, but you also have them as tokens on the board. They call them contaminants. And there's regular circular versions, and then you can upgrade those into square installations that are even more powerful on the board. And you're trying to get rid of the guardians and the sparks, the countermeasures, that's what they call them, and trying to eliminate them from the board. You also get to upgrade your deck by spending symbols to get new cards into your deck. But this has, as most deck builders are usually just adding cards, and then eventually there's some sort of mechanic for removing them from your deck. This does both at once, because whenever you buy a card, you then have to take one of the cards you used to buy that card and eliminate that from your deck. So you always have 15 cards in your deck. It also plays over the course of 3 rounds before the bad guys get to fight back. So you get 5 cards out of your deck, and you get to play those 5. You may keep 1, and then you get 5 more, and you take your next turn, spend those cards, get your remaining 5 cards, spend those, and once everyone has done that, gone all the way through their deck once, then the bad guys get a turn to fight back, and then you evaluate whether you completed that round's task or not, and then good things or bad things will happen. Based on how bad the AI is that you're fighting, you may have to go through 3 rounds of this, or 3 full cycles of this, 4 full cycles of this, and there are different difficulty levels of the bad guy. So I wanted to talk about this because of it being a deck builder, a cooperative game, and my kids are interested in that sort of thing. And I did play this with them well beyond the recommended age level of this. I think it's either 12 or 14 plus.
Yeah.
I apologize. I can't see the box in my house right now. So I did try this with them. And I really appreciated the puzzly nature of this. This one is a thinker. But because of that, it really does slow down, like I was asking you, Suze. So most deck builders have 1 currency, 2 currencies that you start at first, like attack power and money or something. And they sort of build from there. But this has, as I said, 4 currencies plus a wild currency. So right from the start, you have a lot more stuff you have to crunch, and you may want to do something, and then you have to figure out how you're going to make that work with the hand of cards you have. And that can be a brain burner. So this is a brain burner cooperative deck builder with a tactical board element. So I liked it. But my kids lost interest quickly when it wasn't their turn. Again, they were well below the recommended age.
Yeah.
But this is a game that appeals to the puzzlers that are trying to solve the system. And there's also a random element here. Every turn you're rolling dice to add more sparks to the board. But it has a tutorial mode. It's got different levels of bad guy. And so this feels maybe like it's better as a solo experience, because then all of that can happen in your head and not necessarily while you're waiting for someone else to go.
Right.
But I still appreciate Renegade. It's just not the kind of game for someone who wants to have things move quickly. I still give it a thumbs up, but with that caveat that you need to be a puzzler to really go for this. That's called Renegade from Victory Point Games.
Well, I'm glad that you actually answered the question I was going to ask, and that was, does it have a really solid solo mode? Because as you're describing it, it really, I was picking up on that puzzly nature, and it was sounding like a great solo experience, and it sounds like you suspect that it would work well that way.
I think it would, and the rules are very much geared toward that possibility. Everything is scaled based on the number of players, and it includes one player as one of those options on all the scenarios. And I mean, Victory Point Games is known for some solo-only games. It's almost always an option in the games that they produce. So I'm not surprised that solo is a strong aspect of this, and I think it would work well as a solo game for sure.
All right. Well, a game that would not play well solo is Reworld. This is a newer game, but not brand new. It seemed like it flew under the radar just a little bit, but it's from the dynamic team of Kramer and Kiesling, who've designed a lot of great games together. And Reworld's published by Spiel, and it's got a science fiction theme. And it really plays in two primary phases. One, you are loading shuttles onto your spaceship. And then phase two, you're flying to the planet and unloading those shuttles onto the ground to create a colony onto this, uninhabited planet. But really, the bulk of the game is in that first phase, and that's where you're going to spend most of your time. What happens is that you have all these little shuttle tiles, and some of them are farm tiles, some of them are engine tiles or transport tiles, things like that. They all just represent different little shuttles. And you're going to get those tiles and add them to your spaceship so that you can go unload them. But this is where the real meat of the game is, because the way you get these shuttles is that there's a card play involved. You have this deck of cards that's 1 through 5, I believe. And the way you get these tiles is that they're laid out on the board, and then you play a card and then take a tile. It's really simple. Where it starts to get more difficult is that then as cards are filling up and tiles are disappearing, when you want to take a tile and a card is already on the board, you have to match that card. So if I really want this farm tile, but there's a number 2 card already next to it, I have to play a number 2. I mean, there's an exchange, like I could play 2 random cards, but that's very inefficient and very expensive. And then as the board fills up, if you have cards on either side of the tile that you want, you have to match both cards. So if there's a 2 and a 4, I have to play a 2 and a 4 to get that tile. Now, why don't you just kind of go in a circle and make it as cheap as possible? Well, one of the tricks is, and this makes a lot of sense logically, is the order that you take these tiles as you kind of tuck them into your spaceship, you're loading it in linearly. Well, when you go to unload on the planet, they have to unload linearly. So first in, last off. And you have to plan that. So you have to be planning, okay, if I load this ship now, I can't put it anywhere unless I load this ship first, that kind of thing. And so you have to skip around that board, because not only are you figuring out what shuttles to get, you're figuring out where to load them. Oh, and by the way, the number of the card you play determines what column in your ship it goes. So I could play a 2. Well, there's a 2 row. I said column, but I should have said row. There's a number 2 docking bay in my ship, and that's where that shuttle's going to go. So it is pretty thinky. It can be very quick. The turns felt quick. I've played it a number of times. I think some players could get a little wrapped up in the planning a little bit, but it's always felt quick to me. And I just love that board play. There's also these bonus tiles that you can get for, being the first to fill a certain docking bay or being the first to unload a certain docking bay, that those are going to be worth points. And then after all these tiles are gone and you play a certain number of rounds, then you go down to the planet and you unload these tiles again, first in, last off. And you're just kind of, I guess it's like tableau building. There are some light rules around where you can put tiles, and you're trying to, it's almost set collection in a way. You want to kind of group different specific farm types together and things like that, and you're going to score some extra points. There are a few other things like satellites and defense points with some of these satellites and stuff like that, but that's kind of the meat of it. I'm a big fan of Kramer and Kiesling, and with Reworld, I saw it come out. I saw their names on the box. I'm like, okay, I'm interested. But then I just didn't hear a lot about it. Finally went out and grabbed a copy. And boy, I am so glad I did. I love this game. That card play, that thinkiness of figuring out, okay, I want to play this card so I can load this shuttle into that row, but I have to load this one first, and I have to plan my hand. Oh, it clicks and it fires and it works for me. I think my biggest complaint about the game are those shuttle tiles themselves. The art on them tends to look very similar. So you have to spend a little extra time going, okay, is that the farm I need, or is that a transport tile and from a distance? And for some people, especially if they're sight impaired or something, that could be pretty rough on this game, I have to admit. Yeah. But while that actually bothers me, I like the game so much, I work past that little annoyance because the game mechanisms are just so solid and so intriguing for me. And I'm really glad I made an effort to pick this one up, and that is Reworld from Spiel.
Cool. I mean, this is one that I've seen around as well, and it sort of, piqued my interest, but not enough. There wasn't enough buzz around it to really focus in on it. So I appreciate you being interested and taking the plunge, and I'm glad to hear you enjoyed it.
I could see you liking it, Eric.
Okay, cool. One that I tried to bring out with my son recently, one from my days of gaming past, one of our original purchases when we were first getting into the hobby, is one of the Cosmos 2-player line that never made it to the US. This is German only, The Pyramids of the Jaguar. This is sort of Racco-like. It is a 2-player game in which you each have a pyramid with 4 levels. There's a 4-card level, then a 3-card, then a 2-card, then a 1-card level in your pyramid. And your object is to fill this pyramid with numbers that are sequential, going from the lowest number in the bottom left all the way to the highest number at the top of the pyramid. Each round, the numbers go to, I think it's 40. Yeah, all the way up to 40. And the cards are dealt out a certain number. There are some extras that sit on the side of the board. And each turn, you will choose 2 cards from your hand and place them in front of your opponent. Your opponent gets to choose one that they have to put in their pyramid, and then you take one and put it in your pyramid. Now, at first, well, does it really matter? Because they're just going to grab one and stick it somewhere. You're going to grab one and stick it somewhere. But eventually, by looking at what your opponent has in their pyramid, you can force them to have to take a card that they can't place by following the rules. Now, they still get to place it, but they have to cover up something on their pyramid. And then when that happens, you get to move a little scoring meeple along a track based on how high in the pyramid that is. And that can trigger special powers, which let you swap cards, remove tokens, all sorts of stuff. Once you've covered one card with another card, you get a little Jaguar token, the pyramids of the Jaguar, after all. And that means you can't cover that again. So you can actually get locked out of segments, which is not good for your placement possibilities. This continues until someone fills up their pyramid properly, and then you sort of do a possible end of game thing. You see how far you are on the track and flip up a card, and if it's lower than the place you are on the track, the game ends? Yeah, that's right. So the farther along you are on the track, the more likely it is the game ends in that round. Otherwise, you deal out the cards again and do another round. And at the end of the game, whoever is farthest along that bonus track wins. So it's not as much about filling your pyramid, it's about forcing your opponent to take cards that they can't use, which moves your guy along the path. This was a subtlety that I think my son didn't appreciate. He was much more focused on filling up his pyramid and then would get frustrated when he couldn't figure it out. He also misunderstood the rules a little bit. And so this is one that I remember being a mainstay of our collection. My wife and I played a lot of this when we first got it. And bringing it back out again, it certainly shows its age. There's, I think, a reason why this didn't make it over in English. It's not a very exciting game. It's certainly better than Racco, but, I mean, that's not saying a whole lot. It's a very mechanical game. It doesn't have a theme really at all. It's very, very dry. I think just compared to other things I've got in my collection at this point, other two-player games, I don't think this one's going to stick around. I think this may end up on the trade pile soon, which is a little disappointing because it's one from our original collection. I think I should probably ask Stephanie first before I put it on the trade pile. But I don't think that this one is going to be the hit that I thought it would be bringing it out with my son. That's the Pyramids of the Jaguar.
Huh. Well, I have to admit, I'd never heard of it before. So, interesting.
This is an old one.
Yeah. Well, last up for me, I wanted to talk about Sunset Over Water. This is published by Pencil. First game. I know, what a lovely name. Sunset Over Water. And it's designed by Steve Finn, the king of the filler. And in Sunset Over Water, you lay out this grid of cards that represent different vistas, and they have little icons on them, like a mountain or a little wave or raindrop or sun. And it's really those icons you're paying attention to, or you should be paying attention to, if you aren't completely distracted by the absolutely stunning artwork on the cards. But the artwork has nothing to do with the game itself other than thematically, because in Sunset Over Water, you are painters and you're exploring the area and trying to paint beautiful vistas. So you get this tableau of cards out, and you have a little pawn, and it essentially makes a board, and you have cards. And these cards, this little stack of cards, it's also the game timer. You draw 3, you pick one that you want to play, and you put the rest under the deck so that you can get to them later, which actually has a fair amount of strategy in that selection, especially the order you put them back under your deck. And these decks, the cards will determine turn order, because there's a time. Who gets up earliest in the morning to go exploring, right? And the earlier the time is the first player. And then the cards dictate how far you can move, what directions you can move in the grid, and how many paintings you can create or thematically. But ultimately, you move your pawn across the board, and you can pick up a certain number of cards as you go and put that into your personal tableau. Ultimately, there are scorecards that are laid out, or goal cards, and you're trying to meet certain requirements. Maybe maybe you have a tableau that has a mountain and a sun, and a mountain and a raindrop, or whatever. And then if you meet that requirement, you get that scorecard and you move on. It plays very concisely because those little personal individual decks are your game timer. It's really neat. The decks are created so there's absolutely no possibility of a tie, because maybe one card is a 6 a.m. start and then somebody else's deck has a 6:15 a.m. start. So it's very cleverly designed that there can be no ties for first player there. And honestly, that's the whole game. But I really, really enjoy this one. It's very, very simple. It's very light, but it has some depth to it as you're using these cards, planning your movement, also trying to figure out, okay, I know I'm going to go later in the day. That means I could get cut off in this direction, because I see Eric over there is also trying to go for that card, and he's probably going to move in this direction. So maybe I don't want to play this card this round. There is a nice bit of tactical planning that you can do with such a light game in this one. And I've really, really enjoyed it. I've played it at 3 and 4 players, and I've played it a number of times now, and it's really held up. And I've already mentioned it, but that darn art, Beth Sobel did the art.
Oh, yeah.
And oh my gosh, Eric, the scenery in these cards, I just want every card blown up and framed on my wall because they are so gorgeous. And it is one of those things you're looking at, you're like, oh, I could go in that direction and I think I can get the icons I need, but I really want that pretty card over there, so I'll go down there. It's just that good looking. So Sunset Over Water, it's inexpensive, it's light, but it has clever gameplay. I really enjoy this one.
Very cool. Does the art make a panorama like, let's see, what is that? Takedo?
It doesn't, not that I can tell, but there's definitely different, there's a variety of settings, whether it's the cliffs by the water or more, tropical. Yeah, you got to look at it online. The pictures are gorgeous.
Nice. Cool. Last for me is a game that you and Mandy, I know, have talked about, and I know Tom talked about as well, so I'll be very brief, but this is Keyper. That's what I said, right?
Keyper. Yeah.
This is Keyper. This is...
There's so many key games.
I know, one of the latest from Richard Breeze, and this one is a worker placement with different specialist meeples. You have a whole team of different colors, and they're all good at doing different things as you place them on their worker spaces. And you're trying to acquire resources to build buildings and tiles on your own personal board. But the real key to this, is that you start out with a normal assortment, an equal assortment of these things. But as you pass, not really pass, but as one of your actions, you can claim the boards in which you're placing these meeples to do stuff. And so that's your meeple collection for the next round. So if these meeples have been being placed disproportionately, not equally around the different player boards, you may end up with a lot more meeples or a lot fewer meeples than another player. And what I totally missed and didn't play enough, I didn't play well enough for, is that there are some wild meeples, the white-colored meeples that can do lots of different things, can act as any meeple. And they ended up in the hands of one player. Throughout a couple of rounds, he managed to acquire those boards and then had a lot more flexibility in his actions later on. And we were just sort of going, oh, well, I'm stuck now. I've got 3 brown meeples and I can't do anything with them. It also has these really cool flipping tile boards that you get to sort of seed the board each round, each season, with the types of actions that you want to perform. You might not actually get to perform them because somebody else might claim them. But there's also a mechanism where you can jump in on somebody else's space, but they get to do something again if you do that, if you jump on an already claimed space. Sort of getting to reactivate meeples and work together and get bonuses for doing so. Ask for help when you activate a space, and you get bonuses for doing so. I really enjoyed this one. This may be this could easily be my favorite of the Key series. Actually, it's really strong, and I like the puzzly boards. I like the meeple economy. I guess they're keeples. Really,
yeah.
Keeple economy. It's really strong. I'm certainly like it better than Keyflower, which I never really grasped. It's fine. The game is good. I think the problem with Keyflower is that I got taught by Richard Breeze himself, and he destroyed us. So maybe I'm just bitter. I might just be bitter. I really like Keyper a lot. It's very neat, and I'm glad I had a chance to play it.
Excellent. Did you get taught Keyper, or did you read the rulebook to learn it?
I got taught Keyper by our game group head.
I'm envious. That no doubt contributes to how much you enjoy the game, and I am happy for you.
Yeah, it's a difficult one to get through.
The rule book is a bit of a troublesome one, but the game, like you said, it's an intriguing game.
It is indeed. Speaking of intriguing, Mr. Engelstein's been talking about the world of artificial intelligence over the past few installments, and so he continues that exploration now.
Three, two, one, go.
It's time for Game Tech with Geoff Engelstein, where we find out how games really work.
Artificial intelligence researchers frequently use games as a way to test their theories and develop and refine new approaches. I've talked at length here on Game Tech about AlphaGo, which defeated the best Go players in the world and challenged what we know about Go strategy and tactics. And its younger sibling, AlphaZero, mastered games by only being taught the rules, without being given a library of games played by masters to learn from, as earlier AIs have. AIs have defeated the top poker players in Heads Up, No Limit Texas Hold'em, and the list goes on and on. So, is that it? Has humanity lost to AIs? Soon will an AI be able to get fed the rules to any game and master it? I don't think so. And here's Exhibit A, Codenames. Could an AI be developed to play codenames? Now, there are two levels to the game. The first is the rules, the mechanics. And certainly a computer could figure out how to play. If you're the clue giver, say a word and a number. If you're a guesser, point to a card, and the clue giver tells you if it's a blue card, a red card, a bystander, or an assassin. Repeat until the game ends. But, of course, there's a second level to codenames, and it's giving clues that will be meaningful to your teammates and interpreting those clues. It is figuring out how to make connections between certain words while excluding other words that may be really close in meaning or relation. It's about developing categories for things on the fly and hoping that your teammates will figure it out. It is quite literally all the knowledge in the world. The playing field of codenames is the full scope of the human experience, at least that which you think overlaps with your teammates. The rules are a way of using your knowledge from outside the game and bringing it into the game. The knowledge can be the concepts of a word, implications of the word, songs that contain the word, different meanings of it, and more. And all of this is really hard for computers, at least right now. To make a computer play even a passable game of codenames, it needs to have a very deep and subtle knowledge of the meaning of words and of the English language, or whatever language you're playing the game in. This is not something that an AI can develop by playing codenames against itself hundreds of thousands of times. The method that AlphaZero used to master chess, Go, and shogi, it's completely useless here. So, the AlphaZero method won't work. Is there another idea? One is to take the approach IBM used to develop Watson, their Jeopardy-winning supercomputer. Watson was very much tied into world knowledge. It was fed 200 million pages of information on all kinds of topics that are typical in Jeopardy. And that was coupled with a natural language analyzer that tried to make sense of the questions. But even so, I don't think that Watson could conquer codenames. It works by looking for words and phrases in close proximity to each other in those documents to determine relations. So it knows that Herman Melville and Moby Dick and whale are related because they frequently occur in clusters and texts. But it doesn't implicitly understand the meaning of those relations that's required to create those ad hoc categorizations. At least, I don't think so, but I'd be happy to be proven wrong. And Codenames isn't the only game that requires this type of outside knowledge. Mysterium is another example. I think it would be really challenging to develop an AI to play Mysterium with humans. For those that haven't played it, in Mysterium, one player is the ghost and uses cards with surrealistic images to give visions to the players and to get them to guess the elements of a murder. Again, the players are bringing much of the world into the game, trying to make connections between the visions and the objects. What is important in this image? Is it the water? A pipe in the background? The color brown? And what are the connections between these three different images given by the ghost? This would be supremely challenging for a computer to be able to play without understanding the world. In a sense, then, one can say that games like Codenames and Mysterium are analogs of the Turing test for an AI. We could run a test where the clue giver could be either human or AI, but hidden in another room. Then the other players would need to determine if they're playing with a computer. A computer that could consistently, credibly play Codenames or Mysterium would be a good candidate for being treated as intelligent, I think. Maybe it couldn't carry on a conversation like the requirement of a true Turing test, but there's still a threshold that's being crossed to make this happen. So what do you think? Could a computer be taught to play games like this? Is a computer that can play Codenames more intelligent than a computer that can play chess? Or did AI just learn a new trick? This is Geoff Engelstein with Game Tech.
So I think it's good to know that the hope for humanity is the subtlety required to play Codenames and Mysterium well.
I agree. And I trust Geoff because Geoff is really one of the smartest people I've ever met or heard of. So if that's what Geoff says, I feel good.
Yeah.
But Eric, there is one person smarter than Geoff Engelstein out there.
Who?
That's his daughter, Sydney.
You know what? I'm not going to argue with that.
Right? Sydney is, she's scary smart. And she just happened to graduate from college this past weekend. So congratulations to Sydney and to all the Engelsteins out there.
That is awesome. And also for the Engelstein family to no longer have kids in college. That's also a milestone.
Woo! Yeah, I bet there.
So another thing happened this past week. We heard about the nominations for the Spiel des Jahres award. This is the German Game of the Year, which is happens every year, and it's always a big discussion point, not only in Europe but also here in the U.S. This is a big deal in Germany.
Yeah,
it's an award that's generally geared toward families. And a lot of families who may only buy 1 or 2 titles a year look at this recommendation list, the nomination list, and of course the winner, and often just buy that one, saying, "Oh, well, the committee liked this.
Yep.
Let's go with this title. This has to be a good one." And a lot of big name games have become even bigger because of this award. They slap the award symbol on the front of the box, and it's a big deal to be nominated or to win this award. And we just found out of the nominations for this year's award.
Yeah, and I was pretty excited about the list. Some games that I've been lucky enough to try have made it. So it'll be, and I love seeing everybody, out there on the internet kind of chat about what they think about the nominations and what they think will win. Mm-hmm. So for the Spiel, let's see, what was nominated? We have Azul, designed by Michael Kiesling.
Yep.
We have Luxor, a Rudiger Dorn game, and The Mind from Wolfgang Warsch. Now, Eric, how many of these have you played?
I have played Azul, which I really enjoyed, and I think it's a perfect pick for this Spiel des Jahres award. It is family weight. It's simple to teach. It's easy to understand. It feels like a game that would fit this award very well. The Mind I have heard a lot about. I feel like I'm missing the party on this one because I haven't yet played it. Everybody's talking about it all over the place. Luxor, I have to be honest, I had not heard about at all until the award nominations hit. And that seems to happen with at least one of the categories every year, is that something gets nominated and I go, what? What is that? And I feel like maybe this year that's happening more than usual.
It's tough, especially since this is the German Game of the Year, yeah, and whether or not you have a chance to. I only know about Luxor because there was a Kickstarter for it, and I cover Kickstarter, and I had seen it through that. But
yeah.
Rudiger Dorn has designed some of my favorite games, so I have confidence that. Now, I have played The Mind and Azul, and this Wolfgang Warsch we're going to hear more about in just a minute here, kind of popped up not out of nowhere. I don't want to be that dismissive, but Eric, I'll make sure, no matter what, I'll make sure to bring a copy of The Mind to Origins and teach it to you and play it with you. I'd love to play it with you. It's quite clever and it's quite interesting. People call it a spiritual sibling to the game, which is also from NSV Games. But I don't know. I haven't played Luxor, so I can't speak to it knowing the quality of Rudiger Dorn as a designer. I would assume it's a great game. Correct me if I'm wrong, but don't abstract games usually not win the actual Spiel?
Yeah, I think... I don't have all of the data in front of me, but it doesn't seem like it.
Yeah.
I guess Alhambra was a bit of an abstract-y game that won as well. But yeah, usually there's at least some theme, a little stronger theme at least, to the winners.
Well, I love Azul. I absolutely adore that game. It's a gorgeous game, great components, and really fascinating abstract gameplay. So I would happily throw my vote or dollars behind that one, but I can't speak without Luxor. But my gut says Luxor might be the winner, even though I haven't played it, just because of that thematic abstract disconnect and kind of what I've seen or think I've seen in the nominees versus the actual winners. So I guess we'll just have to wait and see there.
So you're thinking Luxor is the stronger thematic game, therefore it has an advantage.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, I mean, Queen has done, I think, well. I know they've won. Alhambra was theirs. They seem to be in the running many years.
Absolutely, and they're out there.
So then there is a more complex award that was added not too long ago, the Kennerspiel des Jahres, which is supposed to be the connoisseur games, which a lot of folks on Board Game Geek really applauded because here's our games. But even then, the Kennerspiel tends to play sort of mid-weight Euro games. You don't usually see the really heavy stuff get nominated for the Spiel des Jahres in either of these categories. But the Kennerspiel, of course, tends to be more difficult than the traditional Spiel des Jahres, the base category.
And I have to say that the lineup this year for the nominations is intriguing on a couple of levels. So who we have in the Kennerspiel this year is Ganz schön clever by Wolfgang Warsch.
What?
Which we just heard about. What? Heaven and Ale, which is Michael Kiesling and Andreas Schmidt, and Die Quacksalber de Quedlinburg.
Sounds good to me.
Thank you. I'm trying. Designed by Wolfgang Warsch.
Huh.
Wolfgang? What is up? I'm just fascinated by the fact that Wolfgang Warsch has so many nominations in a single year.
Yeah.
Talk about exploding onto the scene. And then, there's Michael Kiesling with 2.
And Wolfgang Warsch, he's not a name I remember hearing last year or in years previous. Is this like his debut year?
I think Wolfgang Warsch has had a few games published before, but certainly nothing that would have made them a household name. But in the gaming world, after this year, I mean, let's just face it, Wolfgang Warsch is going to be on people's radars.
Yeah,
now,
for sure.
Eric, how about these? Have you played any of these?
I have not. No, and this is another one
where... Oh, no,
where...
none of them.
I have played none of them. I know you've talked about Ganz schön clever.
Heck yeah.
And Heaven and Ale has come up many times. I've seen it on the table at various conventions, but I've never had a chance to sit down and play it. And Die Quacksalber, I did not know existed until the nomination. I feel like I'm in the dark. In the dark about a lot of these games right now.
Yeah, so obviously I've talked about Ganz schön clever. I made an effort to pick it up because it's one of the Schmidt Spiel roll and write games that I'm so fond of. And another thing I'm just so tickled by is that a roll and write game is up for a Connoisseur's Game Award.
Yeah.
And I feel like that brings some real credibility to this gaming niche that sometimes is viewed as a not dismissed, but it's kind of treated like it's very light and just Yahtzee. When anybody who's an avid roll and write player knows that the games go much deeper, and so I love, if nothing else, seeing Ganz schön clever get recognition on that level. Plus, it is truly a fabulous roll and write game. Heaven and Ale, I've gotten the chance to play a number of times, and Eric, I would teach this to you in a heartbeat. I adore Heaven and Ale. It would be top 3 for me from last year.
Okay.
It's that good. It is weighty. It's interesting. It's thinky. There are multiple paths to victory. It's, a goofy theme about making, brewing beer in the fields. It's got a diabolical scoring track. It's clever all the way around, and I really see it. And it strays. I mean, it's not uber heavy, but it definitely strays. I mean, complexity-wise, compared to like a Ganz schön clever, it's much heavier than that. So it's interesting to see that delta. But yeah, Die Quacksalber, I had not heard of, but there's this darn Wolfgang Warsch again.
Yep.
I got to check it out. It's actually one of those things that I would seek out, but I think it's literally in German only. I don't think it's been translated to English yet.
Yeah, this award nomination, though, has a funny way of getting games to come over here without too much delay. Yay! So you talked about the weight differential between Ganz schön clever and Heaven and Ale. Do you think that's weird that you look at the cover of Ganz schön clever, and it looks like it looks like Quarto or, one of these other Schmidt-Spiele super light roll and writes or dice games. Do you think that's weird that it's in the Connoisseur Award?
I don't know how I feel about that. I think it's interesting when you have to come up with a single award, but there's such a breadth and diversity in game offerings. How you kind of condense it down is really difficult. I mean, for also additional context, the other two titles that the Spiel jury recommended, they didn't nominate, but are recommended at the Kenner Spiel level are Clank and Pioneers. Again, much more, Ganz schön clever is just, it's very themeless roll and write game, whereas Heaven and Nail, Die Quacksalber, all the other ones have theme behind them, and they're much, I don't know, a bigger entity as a game. So yeah, that delta between Ganz schön clever being in there, I think it is interesting. And I, again, as that roll and write fan that I am, I love that recognition. I don't know if that means it has a chance of winning, though.
Yeah, this might be one of those situations where just being in the nomination list is enough to elevate that style of game. But who knows? I think I said that about Exit last year.
Yeah.
And it ended up winning.
Yeah.
So, who knows? It could be roll and write's year.
No matter what, Eric, no matter who wins, and personally, not having played Die Quacksalber, I'll put my vote behind Heaven and Ale, but we'll see what happens. Let's all face it. The real winner of the Spiel this year is Wolfgang Warsch, no matter what games win.
I agree. Although if he doesn't win either award, he's going to become the Suzanne Lucci of the award.
Oh.
I think.
Eric, we're getting to the zone where there's a lot of listeners that won't understand that reference.
I know. I just dated myself significantly. Anyway, let's feel young, shall we? Let's talk about the Kinderspiel des Jahres, which is the Kids Game Award. And this is one that I often don't recognize all the titles because many of these don't make it over here to the U.S. So we've got Emojito by Urtis Sulinskas from Hook. We have Funkelschlatz, which is also known as Dragon's Breath. I like how Haba always gives their titles an English name as well. That also helps. And I think Haba USA should be covering this one. And also one that I have seen, Panic Mansion, which is also known as Shaky Manor, by Asker Harding Grenrud and Daniel Skjold Pedersen from Blue Orange Games.
Yeah.
Panic Mansion and Shaky Manor have this segmented cardboard box with doors in it. And then you've got a bunch of little wooden devices like snakes and eyeballs and spiders and stuff. And you're trying to move the whole thing around and get certain objects in certain rooms and certain objects out of certain rooms based on a card that comes up. And you're racing against the other players to do this faster than them. One that I've considered picking up a few times when I first saw it at Essen last fall. I was, this game is really cool and wanted to track it down. Haven't managed to add it to the collection yet, but I could see this being a big hit with kids and a neat novel addition to the slate of nominees. The others, though, I have not played.
Yeah, so Mojito is a game that it's kind of a combination of Dixit and... what's that face game where you make faces and you have to figure out what they are on the table? I can't remember. Tom likes it. But basically...
Faces?
I think it might be faces, yeah. You get these cards and you have to match either expressions or sounds that convey the face on the card and the emotion on the card. And that's one of those things people can vote on. And then you mix up all these cards and you get a card, you do whatever you have to do to mimic it. And then they get shuffled in with other random cards and those get spread out. And then people vote on which card they think you had. So, obviously very light and goofy and silly, but clearly fun because it got this nomination. And then Funkelschatz is a game. It's got nice table presence. You get this, you create a column or a cylinder with these little plastic rings, and then you dump a bunch of those, the ubiquitous plastic crystals that we see in games so much now in them. And then one by one, on a person's turn, you lift and pull a ring away, and then some of those crystals will inevitably fall, right? Because they have no more support around them.
Okay.
But before that happens, what happens is that there's tokens that match the color of the crystals. So people, based on where they are in score or success, they say, okay, you're looking at this column. You're saying, okay, I want all the purple gems that fall. And then somebody's like, I'll take all the green ones. So you're taking these tokens to indicate which gems you're going to get to collect. Then the ring is pulled away, gems fall. And if you had the purple token, any purple gems that fall, you get to collect and get points for.
Okay.
And so, you know, a little bit of game there. Definitely awesome table presence and really cool components in Funko Shots, and they all look super fun. The only one I've played is Shaky Manor or Panic Mansion, and only got to try it the once and had an absolute blast. You say it'd be fun for kids, but I'm far from my childhood, and I had a blast with it.
Awesome.
So we'll see. I have no vote, right? Because you haven't played them.
Yeah, I have no idea.
We'll see.
So the other big news with the nominations is that for the first time since 2010, the jury decided to award a special prize. This is one that's not nominated for a regular award. They just decided to highlight a title and say, this is really cool. And they did that with Pandemic Legacy Season 2 by Matt Leacock and Rob Daviau. Z-Man Games won the award. It's kind of neat to have that highlighted, but it's like 3 times over the years that the Pandemic system's been nominated. The Pandemic obviously was nominated. Forbidden Island in 2011, which is basically a similar system. And Season 1 of Pandemic Legacy was also given a nod in 2016. Mm-hmm. But now they're just like, you know what? Here you go. They actually said all future Legacy games will have to be measured against this game.
Yeah.
Which makes me really need to play the rest of it. I'm stuck on April. I think we finished April. I'm on May. I have not yet had a chance to move forward, but now I really need to because it's an award-winning game now.
A special award-winning game.
Yes.
I actually think it says a lot that the Spiel organization felt that they wanted to and needed to call this game out and acknowledge its role and its influence and its contributions to the hobby. I think it's pretty darn cool, and I'm really happy for that team. It's a fabulous team, and I have not played Pandemic Legacy Season 2. It's tough for me to get a Legacy game to the table, but all of my friends have played it. Absolutely love it, and I hear them talk about it. It creates stories. It's so compelling for them, and I think that's pretty cool that the Spiel acknowledged that influence.
Yeah. So those are the nominations, and we'll find out what happens later this summer.
Hello, I'm Skip Hampton, with yet another tale of betrayal.
Last Christmas, I got Eclipse the board game under the tree. Me and my son were excited to play it as this was one of our first big games. Sadly, one thing led to another and the game got pushed to the side because of work and family. Then one day, we decided to learn the rules and set up a night to play Eclipse. I read through the rules and understood it quite well, so happily we got up a night ready, cleared the table, and started to set the game up. As we put out the map tiles, one of my younger sons took interest in them. This was a normal thing to happen while we were playing, so he said, "Yeah, sure, go ahead, just don't show us the tiles and put them back when we need them." He happily started to look at them while I read the rules aloud. We finished reading and started playing. We were a little confused about the difference between a tile you want to get and a tile you don't want to, as we reread that section of the rules. After that, it was smooth sailing. For a little while. As the younger brother, around 6, finished looking at the tiles, the older brother I was playing with, about 13, started getting a bad run of luck when pulling map tiles. And yet, I was doing great. After a while, the older brother started to complain that the game was rigged. He couldn't pull a good map tile for the life of him. After the game ended, and I won, we decided to look at the map tile pile. When we laid them out, it looked as if every other tile was the bad one. Every other one were the ones that the older brother had to pull. I called the younger brother over just to find out if he had purposely rigged the deck when we explained the good cards and bad cards so that Big Brother would lose the game. After he confessed, this was a lurking smile on the younger one's face. The older one was a good sport about it and shrugged it off a little, still giving his younger brother the stink eye. We picked up the game and put it back on the shelf, to only sit there for a long, long time. Bye.
Oh, wow.
So, in this case, I think I would be pretty darn proud of the 6-year-old. I know it's sort of mean and devious, but it means that the 6-year-old understood enough about the rules to pick out what was good and bad. And I've actually sort of seen this with my 6-year-old in sort of figuring out some of the mechanics of the game. He doesn't get the strategy all the time, but will know that this is objectively better than this. And so he wants this and not this. And to have your kid do that, even if they're being totally mean to their brother, is kind of a cool feeling.
All I know is maybe that age gap, it sounds like there's 6 and 13, maybe that saved the 6-year-old's life, because I know in my household, if my 6-year-old did that to my 9-year-old, there would be no peace in the house for at least 3 days.
Yeah, I'm sort of imagining that scenario with my 10-year-old, and yeah, that would probably be a bad situation. The 10-year-old is too interested in winning, but still, that little bit of pride, I think I'd be pretty.
Yeah.
After I had to separate them and put them in separate rooms, then I'd still maybe give the kid a high five. All right, are we ready to begin the science?
Science!
It's a Dice Tower Top 10!
The Dice Tower's Top 10 list is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc. Cool Stuff Inc. Cool stuff in stock at coolstuffinc.com.
So it's time to go to science class. And science is such a wide breadth of stuff, Suzanne. This was kind of a tough list to narrow down on, because I probably could have done an entire list of like dexterity games to talk about physics.
Physics, exactly.
But then I would have totally left out chemistry or natural sciences. This was tough. So I tried to spread it out a little bit, but I kept coming across really cool sounding games that I hadn't played.
For sure. I think that doing this list made me realize, other than I was definitely thinking, I could do this game because of the physics element, and ultimately I moved away from that. But what this made me realize is how few more core science-y themed games I actually own or have played. One of them, I actually own these games, but they sit on my shelves because I can't work my way through the rule book, are the Phil Eklund games like Neanderthal and Greenland, Bios Megafauna.
And High Frontier.
These are deep, these are heavy, deep, complex games, but they are also deeply, deeply rooted in real sciences.
Yeah.
And so they seem perfect for this list, but I obviously couldn't put them on because I haven't played them.
Yeah, I almost wanted to jam High Frontier in there, even though I haven't ever played it. But that one, definitely, if you want to talk about physics and rocketry science, you have to almost have a degree in it in order to do well at it.
Right, which conveniently, Phil Eklund is a rocket scientist, so I guess he has that advantage.
Yes, that does help. And a few that I see on your list are ones I would love to put on my list as well, but I haven't played them, so I look forward to discussing them.
Well, you have a couple similarly that I hadn't thought of or have not played. And the other ones that I've looked at and have not yet had a chance to play, but I'm really interested in, are games by Genius Games, which the one that I can think of off the top of my head that's out is Cytosis, but they just had a Kickstarter, and this is partly why I know about them, recently for their next game. And Genius Games, again, is a game that literally makes one of their founding principles is working real science into their games. So with science games, I was like, I haven't played it. But I wanted to mention it because I think it's so worthy to note in this particular list that there are game companies out there specifically crafting hobby games with a scientific foundation.
All right, so without further ado, let's head to class, shall we?
Number 10.
My number 10 is Ket the Laser Game. Now, playing Ket doesn't teach you a whole lot about, it's not really about science, but it's got a laser, and lasers are science-y, right?
Lasers!
You can talk about the creation of of the laser, and then it's all about angles. I mean, Ket is a chess-like game in which you're maneuvering mirrored pieces around the board, trying to get a laser that fires from a fixed point to hit a specific piece. So you're moving your pieces around, they're moving their king piece, their pharaoh piece around, and you every time you move your pieces around, you fire the laser and see if it hits the pharaoh. And when it hits the pharaoh, it lights up. So you can talk about angles, you can talk about the creation of the laser, you can talk about opacity of the pieces and how the light, the laser hitting them affects the illumination. You can talk about the reflectivity of the mirrors. There's, if you get the expansion, there's a beam splitter. So,
that's cool.
You know, there's stuff to talk about in Ket the Laser Game, my number 10.
That sounds amazing. My number 10 is Compounded, which is literally founded in scientific principles like compounds.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really kind of a resource management with trading and negotiation in there as well. You've got cards that represent different real compounds. These are real scientific compounds that you're trying to come up with the elements for and finish up these compounds for points. You can trade elements with other players. And then in a lovely reminder of the dangers of science, you can have explosions. You can have compounds explode, and then that has impacts to other cards out there, and there's a little bit of take that because you can cause explosions and your opponent's compounds that they're trying to work on, which may not be the nicest thing, but it's really great as you're going through these cards and you're seeing. Of course, I can't remember any of them off the top of my head. Nitrous oxide, and all these compounds are real, and the elements are real, and it's got a very great lab theme with your player boards have test tube like illustrations and things like that. So Compounded, rooted in science, definitely fits the theme for this one.
This is one definitely that I think would fit the list. I wholeheartedly agree. I just haven't had a chance to play this one.
Number 9.
Number 9 is going to show up on Suzanne's list, so I'll let her go first, but I think I'll slingshot around and probably overtake her.
Well, my number 9 is Pandemic. I mean, what's to say about Pandemic that everybody that might be listening? Pandemic is a cooperative game about saving the world from expanding diseases, from expanding pandemics. And I think from a scientific perspective, it makes sense. You have specialists that have skill sets. I think thematically there are elements that make a lot of sense with the specialists in traveling and how diseases can spread. And when you think about it, if you kind of were to personify it, you have diseases in place, and then if you don't inhibit them, they can spread to other places and infect other places, and then you have different locations that can just be overwhelmed by that. It's a pretty dire scenario. It's a pretty dark element, like it's a dark turn to science. But all of that is, the pathologies and illnesses and disease and things like that. I mean, that's all very rooted in scientific principles of medicine and things like that. So Pandemic, I felt, belonged on this list. It can definitely fit here, and it's definitely one of the more ubiquitous games in the hobby right now. So Pandemic, my number 9.
I agree. I think I kept it off mine just because it's a little more of a jumping off point. You could certainly use Pandemic as a discussion point to talk about diseases and disease control, but the actual mechanisms don't necessarily relate directly to science, although if you play with the In the Lab expansion, that one feels a little more like you're doing science with the petri dishes and the moving the cubes around and combining them. So you know what? Maybe I should have considered Pandemic with In the Lab, because that one feels like definitely that you're doing more science. But good call.
Thank you.
Number 8.
My number 8 is sort of a specific element of the natural sciences. That's Mermies, which is based on the life cycle and actions of an ant. A specific ant colony, you're expanding its territory, you're creating pheromone trails, which is a concept I hadn't really considered before, to expand your territory, get access to food, to breed new ants, to increase the ability of your colony. It's ultimately a resource resource management and an engine building game. But it's really based around the life cycle of this specific species of ant. So I think you could use that definitely as a jumping off point to learning more about this insect division and use it as a jumping off point. Mermies, my number 8.
Definitely one that I have always been interested in playing. I've heard great things about Mermies. I've never had an opportunity to play it. And so it's good to hear that you enjoy it.
Mm-hmm.
My number 8 shows up on Eric's list a little higher up. I think I'm just going to go sun myself while I wait.
It's a good use of time.
Number 7.
My number 7 is a kid's game from Haba. It's called The Black Pirate. In The Black Pirate, you are using a bellows, basically a nasal aspirator, to squeeze air at a wooden pirate ship with a cloth sail, and you're shooting at the sail and propelling it around the board in order to reach different islands. Now, why this is a good jumping off point for science is now you're talking about force and friction and inertia, and it really illustrates all of those physical scientific points in this silly little dexterity game where you really have to, push a good puff of air at these ships to move them around. It is silly fun, but it's a little more difficult than it at first seems. Learning to move this ship, this tiny little wooden ship, you have to think about the angle at which you're firing the air, what angle are you shooting at the body? Are you shooting at the sail? What happens if you shoot at the top of the sail versus the bottom? There's a lot of physical science in this silly little dexterity game. It's all illustrated very well in The Black Pirate from Haba. My number 7.
I never would have thought of the Black Pirate. We love the Black Pirate in our house, and you brought up excellent points of why it can be considered educational. Well done, Eric. I appreciate that insight.
Yay.
Well, my number 7 was Eric's number 9, and that is Gravwell. This one is it's a drafting game, and you have these spaceships on this spiral board, and you're just trying to reach this singularity. First, it's a race game, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
But there's 2 elements that I think really make it a great science game. First of all, the cards themselves thematically are named after elements from the periodic table. There's a couple in there that are fake elements, but a lot of the cards, by and large, are real elements, and I think that that's a really fun detail. It's unnecessary, but it's a fun detail that they mixed in there. And then the core of the game, as you're working these ships and you're racing toward the middle and you're using these cards to manipulate your ships, it's really the concepts of repulsion and propulsion, right?
Mm-hmm.
That physics element and where you can slingshot around and how you can push off of other ships if they're nearby and what direction that forces you to go to and things like that. I think that whether you want to talk about magnets or gravity or things like that, all of that can be encapsulated by what you see in Gravwell. My number 7.
Yeah. If you really imagine the slingshotting of these different objects as they are attracted to each other and repelled by each other, and if you really visualize that, it makes for a very scientific, physical collision of objects. It's really neat to think about it, although it is a very mechanical sort of game. If you really just look at it as numbers and movement on the board, it's not quite as interesting. But if you really think about these as objects floating in space on this continuum and slingshotting around each other and which one's closest and how they react to each other, it's very, very cool.
Number 6.
My number 6, much like Compounded, is based on the periodic table, but it's maybe a little simpler. That's Chemistry Flux. This is the Looney Labs variant of the Flux system that uses chemistry. Each of the keepers in this version of Flux is one of the elements of the periodic table. And the goals that you're trying to achieve are often compounds. And so if you're, say, trying to make water, you want to have 2 hydrogen and 1 oxygen, and you will have completed that goal. So in the process of a set collection game and all of the other Flux craziness that happens, I think you get a bonus in this one if you're wearing a lab coat. You also learn about what makes up various compounds. And so you get a good passing knowledge of the periodic table with Chemistry Flux, my number 6.
Oh, that's so cool. I've never played that version. That sounds really educational. Awesome.
Yeah. They have a whole series of educational fluxes.
I haven't paid a lot of attention to Flux. I have a couple of sets of it, but it's just not something that gets to the table much. So I guess I haven't been keeping track of it, but I think that's awesome.
Yeah, there's also an anatomy flux that just came out that I hadn't played. I sort of missed the review window for that one. But that one has anatomy trivia as like a bonus mechanic that you can earn more cards or extra actions or something by reciting trivia about, say, the spleen when you play the spleen keeper. Yeah, so that one would fit this list as well. I just haven't played it.
Alrighty. Well, my number 6 is less organ oriented, and that is Manhattan Project Energy Empire. Now, the Manhattan Project is a fairly well-known worker placement game around creating nuclear bombs, kind of a dark theme. Energy Empire moves forward in the future a little bit, and it's really about an energy crisis and generating different types of energy and how it impacts the environment. It holds on to that core and some of the more intriguing worker placement elements of the Manhattan Project, where, there's different spots that let you get different resources or take actions, but a worker there doesn't necessarily block it. It just makes it more expensive for other people to go in. So if, Eric, you've blocked me off from a space, I can come in and still use it, but I have to create a stack of workers that's taller than yours, and I can stack them by using energy tokens as well to kind of build it up.
Oh, interesting.
I really like that worker placement element. Yeah, it's very, very cool. You're going to be collecting cards that you can claim. And another really fun thing is that as you activate a specific buildings are kind of grouped in different colors. I'm sure there's some thematic element to it that I can't think of right now, but they're different colors, and you can chain them. So when you activate a building, any buildings or cards that you've managed to collect and gain, it creates a chain, and they also activate as well. So it's really a great little engine building element to the game as well. And ultimately, the game's about trying to generate energy through different means. There's oil and coal and green energy. But then when you use those energies I talked about, in the energy is what you can stack up for your worker placement. So that's, energy provides a lot of value. Some energy will give you pollution points. And you have a little personal player board with different, sky and water and things like this. And as you gain these pollution points, you start marking and blocking off these points on your board, which is a bummer because at the end of the game, clean areas on your player board can count for points. So as you pollute them, you are literally losing points. And of course, green energy, if you manage to use green energy, you don't get any pollution, but all this is generated through dice, and the green energy dice don't necessarily produce as much energy. So you can go hardcore oil and generate a ton of energy, but you're going to get a ton of pollution, or you can go slower with green and not get that pollution. So obviously, the environmental science element to Energy Empire is really there. You have all the elements of energy production from the different types of energy that you can produce, and there's kind of that thematic element with pollution and its impact to the environment on your player board and how you can manipulate that. And all of those are environmental science is an important science now more than ever. And so it's kind of interesting as you're making choices in this game, depending on how into the theme you get, you start to feel some of the pressure and weight of those decisions and how you're impacting the environment with the different kinds of energy production that you're doing. So I think that that's a really fascinating scientific element to Energy Empire, beyond the fact that I think it's just a really fun worker placement game.
Yeah. I mean, one that I guess I could probably consider for this list would be CO2, which I only played once, but did enjoy. That would also fit under this, environmental sciences umbrella. That I think I neglected a little bit on my list, but still a great choice.
Thank you, and that's Energy Empire, my number 6.
Number 5.
My number 5, I almost wrote off. I sort of looked at it and went, yeah, no. But then the more I thought about it, and the more as I was doing research, I came across this on a lot of teachers' lists, saying this is a game that we use in our classroom and have actually gotten a lot of use out of, and that's Jenga. Jenga, the stacking game with the wood pieces, you're making a tower and you're pulling pieces out and putting them on the top. So what this can teach is inertia, friction. You have to define friction when you're playing this in a classroom, and having to explain why one piece is easier to pull out of the stack than another. And then you've got the whole balance aspect and what forces will cause the tower to tilt in what direction, what happens when you shake the table. There's a lot that can be learned from a stack of wooden blocks. And so Jenga is an excellent jumping off point for the physical sciences. That's why it's my number 5.
I applaud your bold, out-of-the-box thinking, Eric. I love it. Love it. I love Jenga, and I love that you picked it for this list.
Nice.
My number 5 is called Pentaquark. Pentaquark is part of Button Shy Games' little wallet series of games. So these are all 18-card decks. Micro games, essentially, that come in these little plastic wallets. Pentaquark is actually a solitaire game, but it's based on quark science and quarks, which I'll be honest, Eric, I did not recall this from my high school science days until I read about Pentaquark when I backed it on Kickstarter. Quarks are the smallest particles that science knows of right now.
Yep.
And I had forgotten. So Pentaquark is all about creating this group of quarks. Apparently you can't do anything with quarks. They're so small as individuals, so you have to kind of create these groupings of them, and like a pentaquark. And ultimately the game is about creating a pentaquark. But quarks have there's different types of quarks. There's up and down quarks. There are anti-quarks and bottom quarks. I mean, I just by playing the game and having them really embrace that theme and go deep into the terminology, it made me learn because I had to go look this stuff up to figure out what the heck is going on here. You have these different quark cards, and then there are rules as you play. They have some colors, and then, a quark or an anti-quark of the same color that kind of are the opposites of each other. And ultimately, to create a pentaquark in your detection zone, in your collider zone, you want to gather the units that you need to create this pentaquark, which is 2 up quarks, a down quark, a charm, and an anti-charm. But as you're going through this, it's very much deck management, or I guess hand management. You're putting cards out, and you always have to make a choice. What card goes down to the detection zone, what gets discarded that could come back, and what gets scattered. And you are going to lose this card for the entire game. So you randomly draw from the deck, and then you have to make decisions with these cards. And the cards are double-sided. So if it's the positive on one side, it'll be the antithesis on the other side. And when you go through the whole deck and you refresh that discard, you flip it over. And for 18 cards, this is the smallest game that has hurt my brain so badly in trying to figure it out. Just beyond the theme, the planning that has to go into predicting how you manage this deck when you sacrifice a card. There's also an annihilation card that comes in that forces you to discard cards eventually, or scatter cards eventually. Holy cow. You cannot dismiss this game as a light game for 18 cards. It really forces you to plan and think and understand what your goal is. And it's really rewarding when you win, which I can only say because I've done it like twice. It's hard. It's a hard game. But it's all rooted in this great quark science. So as you're playing it, you're learning these terms, you're getting an inkling of how these elements may interact with each other in the real world. And I think besides the fact that it just really forces your brain to work in this game, there's that wonderful quark science basis to it that, similar to me, when you talk about jumping off point, I got the game. I started looking things up because I had to know more. And that is why Pentaquark is my number 5.
Huh. I had not ever heard of this one, and now I know how much I don't know.
I highly recommend it. If anybody likes little solitaire games, it's a good one.
Number 4.
My number 4 could stand in for a lot of flicking games, like Pitch Car or tabletop curling or catacombs, but I went for the granddaddy, the most basic, Crokinole. especially because this game is all about banking your shots off of other pieces. The benefit of doing these flicking games is that you can learn about angles. What happens when I hit this piece straight on versus at an angle, what happens to the two of them as they move around. And in Crokinole, you have to hit one of your opponent's pieces in order for your shot to count. So if you want your shot to go into the center, into the hole to get the most points, you have to bank it off another player's piece at just the right angle that it goes through the posts into the center. And that is sometimes more difficult than it sounds. So figuring out what those angles are is an exercise in physics, much like billiards would or pool. How do you take these circular objects and get the angles just right? Crokinole, my number 4.
Now I feel like going and playing Crokinole. I love that game. My number 4 is Fauna. This is a Friedman Freeze game. It's really a trivia game, all about Animalia out there. You've got a big board that's got a map on it and a deck of cards. And basically, an animal's going to be revealed kind of... you just see the top half, so you just see the animal that is up to call. And you're trying to figure out elements of this animal, how long its tail is, how big it is, what it eats, and that kind of thing. But also, very importantly, where it's from. And you've got this board, and you're going to place a token on where you think it is. And there's a slight speed element to it, because once a token's out there, once a spot is claimed on the board, nobody else can go in there. So there's kind of if you know the answer, you want to get in there fast. But similar to a game like Wits and Wagers, you can win Fauna without knowing a lot of animal trivia, because you can put your token out adjacent, and if you think your friend absolutely knows everything about this animal, you can play adjacent to a location that they've placed their cube in, and you can still get points for being adjacent to a correct answer, and that kind of thing. So there's a scoring element, there's a game element to it, and it's quite fun. But ultimately, when you think about science and education, Fauna is full of knowledge and learning. All these cards have so many interesting facts about a huge breadth of animal species out there. I don't think you can play Fauna without learning a lot about animals that you never knew before, and details about animals that you don't necessarily talk about on an everyday basis. I mean, you may know that there's African elephants and Indian elephants, but do you know how heavy they are and what those differences are and their ear shape? I mean, you're going to learn all that in Fauna. And even if you don't play the game, you just pull out the deck of cards and go through it. And they're practically like flashcards. So that is why Fauna is my number 4 science game.
Cool. And I believe this was then later re-implemented in the Bezier release, America, the game. Is that right?
That's right. It has I've never played that, but it uses the same mechanisms, but it's geography-based or is it American history-based, maybe?
Something like that.
Cool. But not scientific, haha.
Yeah, not so much.
Number 3.
So number 3 for me showed up as number 8 on Suzanne's list, and that's Photosynthesis, a game about growing various trees. And not only does it teach you about the life cycle of a tree, from seed to seedling and then to a larger tree growing bigger in the forest, it also teaches you about the angles of the sun in various positions and how larger trees crowd out smaller trees. And a nice jumping off point for the natural sciences, for tree study. And plus, it's a neat game with a cool sun that moves around the board. Anyway, Photosynthesis, my number 3.
Not only is Photosynthesis, a very clever science game, but it's beautiful, right? You've got all those gorgeous components in it, these 3D tree stands, and the art's very pretty. But it's also quite mean. I mean, Eric, at least when I've played it, it's pretty take that as far as how you can block people off and things like that.
Very much so, yes. It is the nastiest trees that you can imagine. Imagine those evil forests from those fairy tales and stuff. Those are the trees you're dealing with. They look all pretty, but they're actually the ones with the evil faces and yeah, that's really what they are.
That's my headcanon from now on for sure. Well, my number 3 shows up a little bit higher on Eric's list, so I think I'm going to jump in a rover and head on over there to meet you, Eric.
Number 2.
Oh, there you are.
Hey, I'm right here. Yes, my number 2, Suzanne's number 3, is Terraforming Mars, a game that is very much based on actual science. We have lots of science fiction games. This is what we would call a science fact game that is based on near future actual science, what it would take to terraform a planet, and adjusting oxygen levels and water levels and technology you'd actually need to use and cards that seem to, I mean, it's abstracted and everything, but seem to have an effect that makes sense for what if you slammed an asteroid into the surface of the planet, this is the sort of thing that would happen. And it does seem like many of these cards are based on that. So for a science classroom that's talking about rocketry and stellar planetary science, this would be an excellent supportive work. Terraforming Mars, my number 2, and Suzanne's number 3.
Well said, Eric. Excellent choice. My number 2 is Evolution from North Star Games. Evolution is a game in which you're creating different species of animals, and each species that you create has different traits that are based on cards that you can play to it. Maybe it's a climber or a digger, or it has a hard shell, or it has a long neck. And maybe you're going to turn it carnivorous, because ultimately in evolution, you want to make sure that your species is growing, both in size and quantity, and that you can always feed them. Of course, if you turn carnivorous, you get to eat your other species instead of the wonderful plant food that's in the watering hole. And, there's also the climate expansion, which really uplevels that science element, because now you have all the climatology elements to deal with as well. From a scientific perspective, I think Evolution talks about evolution. I mean, very, very directly, but in a beautifully illustrated way. What happens and how do these animals interact if they have a long neck, and how does that change what the animal can eat or how they survive, or if they have claws or if they are a carnivore, how does that impact how these species interact with each other? I think it's a wonderful, fun game, but from a scientific point of view, it's right there in your face. And I think that while some of the art is fantastical, all the principles about those traits especially are very much rooted in reality, and how these characteristics or abilities that animals may have impact that species in real life and impacts them. And that is why Evolution makes my number 2.
Yeah, this barely missed my cut. This might be the number 11 on the list, so good choice.
And finally, number 1.
My number 1. So we've talked about all these specific branches of science, physics and biology and chemistry, and I wanted to cover something that talks about the scientific method. And lots of deduction games came to mind, but the one that stood out the most is this old school game called Black Box.
I have never heard of this.
There are, well, it's either a solitaire or a 2-player game. It's sort of the same style of game as Mastermind. So one player sets up the board. There are particles hidden in this grid, and then you cover it up. So you've got these particles at specific points, and then you cover it, and the other player sends electrons or lasers or rays, I forget what they call them, at various points around this grid. And the particles will absorb the rays or they will reflect the rays. And so based on where the particle, the beam you send in comes out, you learn more about what's inside the black box. So you have this method where, I think something is over here, or the particle or my ray behaving this way could be one of these 2 or 3 things. So how do I narrow that down and figure out exactly where these particles are? And your score is based on how many of these rays you have to shoot into the box before you figure out what the actual solution is. Very puzzly, but I think really embodies the scientific method and would be a good classroom tool for for learning about that style of approaching a problem and how do you narrow down your possibilities. I recently acquired an actual copy of this. I'd only played it online. Several people apparently have found copies of this in their garage and have offered it to me. I have one. Thanks, everybody. But somebody at PAX was like, here you go. This is yours now. And I haven't yet played it with the kids. But it is a fascinating exploration of the scientific method and a deduction game. Black Box, my number one.
Wow, that is pretty cool. I'm going to go look that one up. All right. Well, topping off my list at number one, perhaps similar to the last game I just spoke about, is Dominant Species. Similar to Evolution, thematically, you're controlling and evolving a group of animals. You have a specific species that has different characteristics and abilities. There's a little bit of area control as you're trying to spread your species across this land, dealing with an encroaching ice age that's eating up the property around you, dealing with all of your competitive species around. There's some really cool action selection involved in how you can take different actions, whether you're going to grow your species or spread out or deal with that, because you're trying to get different cards that will give you extra actions and things like that as you go from a mechanical point of view. From a science point of view, again, you've got a lot of things rooted in very real evolutionary science, as you have arachnids or reptiles or amphibians, mammals that you get to choose from, and then they have abilities that align with those species traits. I think that the area control or the competition between species could be considered thematic, and how different elements of a species and how they interact can impact that. How the species interacts with the terrain and the territory that they're on, and bonuses that they can get from that is also very thematic. And then, of course, when you're talking about science and our planet throughout the eons, when you talk about an encroaching ice age and how that would have impacted the species, what animals would have survived, what animals would have perished, how that would have impacted them, all of that is something that you can discuss, that can be triggered out of a game of Dominant Species. And beyond that, it's just truly a phenomenal game to play. So I had to put Dominant Species at my number one.
Yeah, I guess technically this made my short list as well, but the only time I played this was such a disaster. My species got wiped off the board by a meteor almost immediately, like in round one of the game. And while I fought back, the whole thing lasted like 6 hours playing this, and it soured me on the whole thing. So yes, I think you're right, but it's not one that I would have put on my list.
I think that's really fair. It's definitely not a game for everybody. Even a quicker game will take a little bit of time if everybody knows it. It has a higher player count, so you can kind of really get embedded. I mean, you can play it with up to 6, and that's gonna pull out the play time a little bit. So you're right. It is heavier. It is longer. For those of you who have an iOS device, there was, I'm not sure if it's still on the market, but there was a fairly decent app version of it, Eric. And I've played Dominant Species twice in real life and had positive experiences with it. But I've actually played it at least a dozen times or more on the app version, solitaire, because the egg play against the AI, and it was a very pleasant experience. And it's very relative to a real game of Dominant Species. It's quick, and it's also a way to explore the strategies of the game without getting demolished. So those are my tips on Dominant Species.
Awesome. So let's turn to the people's choice. What did you think were the best games for teaching science? Number 10 was Chemistry Flux, which we mentioned already. Number 9 was the original Manhattan Project.
I'm going to give myself half a point for that one.
Sure, okay. Number 8, Pandemic, as you mentioned. Number 7, Gravwell, which made both of our lists. Number 6 was Viral, which I think I didn't really think about this one because the viruses are so cartoony, but certainly for anatomy, you've got this, vaguely human shape of various organs and the way they're all interconnected. So yeah, that's based on real anatomical science for sure. Number 5 was Dominant Species, as we just talked about. Number 4, Cytosis, which I don't think I've ever heard of.
I mentioned that just a little bit ago. That's Genius Games, that company that does scientifically rooted games. I love seeing it on this list.
All right.
Our listeners are so smart.
They are. Number 3 was Compounded, which we mentioned. Number 2, Evolution. And number 1, Terraforming Mars, which really doesn't surprise me because it's such a popular game and it fits the list. So that would be number 1.
Excellent list. Well done.
So I'm glancing at my battery indicator, Suzanne, and I think we need to wrap this thing up. But I really appreciate you hanging out with me once again, and hopefully I'll get to chat with Mandy sometime in the near future.
If nothing else, we will have a great time at Origins together.
It's going to be a blast. It's only a few weeks away at this point, which I haven't quite adjusted to, but yeah, that's coming up very, very soon. And then it's the nonstop steamroller of events for the rest of the year, believe it or not.
It'll be great.
But until next time, until we're able to hang out once again, I'm Eric Summerer.
And I'm Suzanne Sheldon.
And you've been listening to The Dice Tower. Thanks for listening. Promotional consideration has been provided by game publishers in the form of review copies of games. This episode, number 556, was recorded on May 19th, 2018. Mandy and Suzanne join you next week, and in 2 weeks, Tom and I will present our top 10 cooperative games. Support for this podcast comes from listeners like you. Thank you for spreading the word. And speaking of support, the Jack Vassell Memorial Fund is dedicated to providing support to members of the board gaming community in their hour of need. Find out more about the fund's mission and how you can help at jackvassell.org. The Dice Tower is produced by Tom, Mandy, Suzanne, and Eric, with production assistance from Itai Perez, Derek Porter, and Rob Searing. Special thanks to Jeff Rademacher for editing this week's show. Our theme was composed by Timothy Pinkham. Our emergency evacuation plan for our chocolate supply in the case of flooding provided by Rococo. And hosting is provided by Cool Stuff Inc., where you can find great games at great prices at coolstuffinc.com. We love feedback. Visit the Dice Tower Guild at BoardGameGeek.com. Email us at dicetower@gmail.com or follow us on Facebook. And of course, you can find more from the Dice Tower Network, including the Out of Game Podcast, Board Game Design Lab, the D6 Generation, the Family Gamers, Blue Peg, Pink Peg, the Portal Gaming Podcast, Every Night is Game Night, and Board Game Breakfast at dicetowernetwork.com. Until next time, from all the gang at the Dice Tower, have fun gaming. You know, considering my current situation, Suzanne, I probably should have put Power Grid on the list.
No joke. I actually thought of that too. It would have been perfect. That's okay. Considering the situation you're in, you're forgiven.
Maybe it was too painful.
I really hope you get power back on soon, Eric.
Me too. Me too.